Stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues.
Good morning and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hachem with U.S. Arab Radio. Happy Friday and thank you for listening. Today is Friday and it's the beginning of the weekend. Summer is going to start soon and it's getting hot every now and then, but we can't complain. Yesterday it rained pretty hard and we could use the rain, but I hope the storm didn't do any damage. In the program today, we're going to be talking about the topic that is really taken the whole world by storm, which is the Israeli-Iran war. Israel attacked Iran last week, and this is something that Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has been wanting to do for a long time, for almost 20 years. He's been infatuated with attacking Iran. He tried to convince several American presidents before, and they did not agree with him. And, right now, Mr. Trump agreed with him and then gave him the go-ahead to go with the war. And this is a very dangerous war. This could ignite the entire Middle East. Attacking Iran is against international law. It's against the UN Charter. And, Israel said that Iran is pretty close at making a bomb. There are no evidence to support that. Mr. Netanyahu has been telling us this for a long time, since 2012, even before then. It's the same argument that Mr. Netanyahu made against Saddam Hussein and took us to war. Then we went to war in Iraq, and then it was on all bad intelligence. But Israel had a totally different reason why they wanted Iraq destroyed. And the war has claimed hundreds of people dead in Iran and Israel, a lot of damage. And Israel has been a nuclear country since 1968 or in the 60s, late 60s. And Israel wants to continue to dominate that. And does not want, they attacked Syria to prevent him from having any nuclear know-how. They attacked Iraq and destroyed that plant there. And then now they're attacking Iran. And they're saying that Iran should not have the know-how for anything about nuclear power. Iran, which is a signatory of the treaty against creating nuclear weapons, has been trying to develop nuclear technology peaceful nuclear technology for industries, for science, which it has a right to under the charter of that treaty. There are no evidence whatsoever to support that Iran has been developing a nuclear weapon. Iran has enriched uranium to a certain degree, which could, if it decides to, but it's bound by the treaty. And if Iran wanted to clear the nuclear weapon, it would have withdrawn from the treaty and then done whatever it really wants to do. So the attack on Iran is blatantly against international law. I know that a lot of people in this country support the attack, but and a lot of people in this country support the killing of women and children in Gaza and the starvation in Gaza and the genocide in Gaza. A lot of people in this country, and it's wrong. And the attack on Iran is wrong. And somebody needs to say that. People tell you that Israel has a right to defend itself. You don't defend yourself by attacking another country. You defend yourself if you're attacked, but not by going and attacking another country, attacking their capital, their hospitals, their schools. It doesn't work out that way. It really does not. Where are we going to go from here? Okay? Let's see one of these plants has any nuclear radiation in it, and then it gets destroyed, and radiation gets out and kills hundreds of thousands of people and travels over Iran to another country. Same thing. If something happens in Israel, which it has more than four. I'm told, I don't know. We don't know that. We don't know the exact number of missiles that Israel has. And then they have the Demiona plant, which is they develop nuclear power there. And if that is hit, okay, or if it's, Israel decides to retaliate with nuclear weapon itself, okay, what's going to happen? This is really a slippery slope of terrible beginning to a third world war, basically, and ruining the whole area. The whole area is so compact there. It hasn't. What happened in Israel, in Iran right now, has not really impacted the world economy as bad as it may if the war gets out of hand. President Trump said that he's thinking about joining the war. He's thinking about carrying military actions, and then he had given Iran 2 weeks to reach an agreement. What are you selling? What, a melon? These agreements takes months and months and months to negotiate. For the first place, when we told, when the United States went into negotiations with Iran in regard to nuclear weapons, the president put a 60-day deadline on that. 60-day deadline on negotiating a complicated issue. This is like set up to fail. On the day 61, Israel attacks, which tells me that this was set up to fail, was set up to really attack Iran. And, whether you agree with the Iranian government or not, that's not the issue. The issue here is the potential of a major war in an area that is already unstable. Okay? And then the repercussions on everybody, on the world, on the people in the area, on civilians. You're playing with nuclear radiation. That's what you're playing with, okay? You're playing with a horrible, horrible weapon. I don't understand why would anybody want to deal with that. And then everybody's saying, well, it's a preemptive strike. What's the preemptive? There's no such a thing as a preemptive strike. That does not give you the right to attack another country. That does not give you the right. And they're negotiating. They're negotiating a deal, okay? It doesn't work out that way. It really does not. There are very few sane voices in America that are trying to convince the president not to get involved in this war. Didn't he tell us that? I don't want wars. I want peace. I want to make I make a good deal. I'm the deal maker. Well, show us what kind of deal maker you make, okay? What kind of deals you make? Show us. Is that how you make a deal? You set a 60-day deadline, and then you say to Israel, "Go and attack Iran," and then the lies come in and say, "Oh, America is not involved in this war." America is involved. America is providing intelligence. Israeli planes are using American lines over Iraq, and America has given Israel all the weapons it needs to carry out the war. And America is defending Israel when Iran is striking. So America is part of this war. And for anybody to tell you that America is not part of this war, they're not telling the truth. There's a lot of propaganda out there, okay? And it's making life hell for both Iranians and Israelis. And we don't need that. We have enough to worry about. Now, why would Mr. Netanyahu do that? First, this has created a distraction from Gaza, where the genocide is going on there. And now the new thing is that, you bring in some food and you put them out there, and when people come in, you shoot them. Okay? This is what's going on in Gaza. And then Mr. Netanyahu has his own legal problems, because if any of the wars stops, most likely he's going to go to jail. He doesn't want to go to jail. Plus, there are a lot of issues there. No, we don't need more wars. We really don't. We've had enough more wars. Okay? And everybody tells you, well, it's the Middle East, there'll always be war. No. There are wars because we tolerate it. There are wars because we help the war. Okay? We didn't have to invade Iraq. We didn't have to destroy Syria. We don't have to destroy Yemen. We don't have to destroy, we didn't have to destroy Libya. We destroyed Libya. Okay? We didn't have to do that. Sudan. The whole area, we just taking it one part after another into a war. Why? Look at the war in Yemen. Okay? We helped Saudi Arabia launch a war against Yemen. Yemen is a poor country. How much did it cost Saudi Arabia? Billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. Had the Saudis given this money to the Yemenis would have worshipped the Saudis. You don't have to bomb them. You just give them some money. You're going to lose the money anyway. Has anybody thought about that? No, because somebody wants to sell weapons and somebody wants to see these countries kill each other. Same thing in Syria. We had many chances to create a good break in Syria, and we choose not to do that. We favor force. And that's not really a good way to go. It really is not. And, a lot of people have a lot of perspectives on it. I favor peace. I favor trade. I favor democracy. I favor respect of the law. And you don't see that in the Middle East right now. You don't see that in the world right now. Okay? You really do not see that. And it's really unfortunate that America is not taking a role in which it's really helping, creating these opportunities, business opportunities, more trade. What are we doing right now? Imposing tariffs and tariffs and tariffs and tariffs. Tariffs are war. Okay? You're declaring war on nations. You're declaring war on yourself. You place tariffs on somebody, they're going to place tariffs on you. Okay? Free trade, no tariffs, no wars. Why do we have to kill each other? Okay? Isn't there enough resources for both Israelis and Palestinians to live together in that area? Yes, there is. But neither one wants to live with the other. It doesn't work out that way. It does not. It really does not. It's really sad. When you wake up in the morning and you look at the news and then somebody tells you, well, 50 people got killed here and 20 people got killed here and 100 people got killed while they're trying to get flour so they can make a bread. Can you imagine? We're using food as a weapon to starve people, and when they come in to eat, we shoot them. And then we say, well, there was a terrorist hiding between them. Shut up. Terrorists hiding between them. These are people starving to death. Or they say, oh, they were trying to steal they're hungry. They're taking food to their children. What would you do if your children are very hungry? They're going to die from starvation. Would you steal some flour? You're just sitting there in your tank and you start shooting at people, and then you're going to come back and lecture us on morality. We're the most ethical. Israelis will tell you we have the most ethical military. Yeah, right. It's unfortunate. It's really, really unfortunate. Again, you can disagree with the Iranian government all you want, but that does not really excuse starting a war in the Middle East because of that. And then we're not doing enough to stop it. We're just helping the war. We're putting more oil on the fire. And that's not good. We're going to continue. We're going to be talking to Dr. Camron Amin. And, we're going to be, he's an Iranian descent, and he's going to give us his own perspective on what's going on in Iran and in the Middle East. Please stay tuned. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Jumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493. With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600.
Welcome back, and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hachem with US Radio. We're going to continue the discussion about the Israel-Iran war. And joining us this morning is Dr. Camron Amin, a professor of Middle East and Iranian Diaspora Studies at the University of Michigan Dearborn. Good morning, Dr. Amin. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Could you tell us a little bit about you before we talk about the unfortunate war?
Well, sure. So I was born in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, to Iranian father and American mom. Lived in Iran for a little while during the 70s, and after going to undergraduate, I went to graduate school, studied Near Eastern languages and civilizations, and eventually wound up doing what I do now.
Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Do you visit Iran?
I haven't visited Iran since 2005, so it's been a while.
It's been a while. Okay. Well, I mean, the war is going on, and we just wanted to give it a little bit of background, and then it didn't come as a surprise to me that Israel would launch a war. Mr. Netanyahu has been, wanting to do this for 20 years, and and all of the other things that are really going on in the Middle East that made this possible. What are your thoughts first?
Well, I think you are, first of all, right that there has been a sort of a long-standing desire by the current government of Israel to do something militarily kinetic about Iran's nuclear program. And here I want to briefly just make a distinction for your listeners. Nuclear program and nuclear weapons program are different things. And I sometimes feel like when the conversation's happening, there's a conflation of those two things. The thing that is at issue, I think, for Iran is whether or not they have a weapons program. And U.S. assessments are that since 2003, they have not had a weapons program. But they've had a nuclear program for as long as Israel's had one. Iran got its first reactor from the U.S., from the Atoms for Peace in the 1950s, and is a signatory to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So it has the right to a civilian nuclear program, which is their stance. I think since the revolution of 79, when prior to that, the government in Iran actually had recognized the state of Israel, there's a big shift. One of the first foreign visitors to the new Islamic Republic is Yasser Arafat, the PLO. You see a shift in Iran's diplomatic and political stance towards Israel. But even with that, for a long time, there's a strange occasional cooperation between the two countries with respect to Iraq, for example. And Israel is also a country that has a large Iranian-born or Iranian immigrant population, as Jewish Iranians or Baha'i Iranians. It's one of the top 10 diaspora countries for Iranians. And there still are Jews in Iran. So there's a strange intimacy culturally, and yet what has happened is that I think Iran has become the sort of external enemy, replacing Saddam Hussein from the Israeli perspective as the existential threat. You may recall a lot of what we're hearing about Iran now is a lot of what we would have heard about Saddam Hussein in the late 80s and definitely in the 90s, right, leading up to 2003.
Which turned out to be all false.
Which, well, I mean, the Iraqi WD program was definitely not what it was advertised to be. There was definitely not I mean, they didn't pose the kind of threat. And it turns out, as you point out, that after we invade and occupy and look, we don't find evidence for what we claimed was the rationale for the war, for the invasion in 2003. Yeah. And I think there's definitely there's a hangover and skepticism from that. But we have some more data points about Iran. One of the things that happened, several administrations have tried to constrain Iran's ability to transition from a civilian program to a weapons program. And the main way they're trying to do that is on the question of what level of enrichment can Iranians have of their uranium. And all the negotiations that did happen with the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015-2016, was around restraining, having Iran agree to limit how the level to which it could enrich uranium so it could not be used in a weapon. And that was supposed to be the mechanism by which Iran's program was verified to be civilian and not military. The Netanyahu government and most Israeli governments have simply not accepted that. And Iran has been a very convenient excuse for Israeli governments to not resolve on a Palestinian state or move in that direction or do anything to solve that problem. I think what makes this present moment different from before is the fact that the Islamic Republic's fingerprints, to some extent, are attached to October 7th. And that provides a new impetus for where we are now. I have to admit that as a Iran watcher and a person who has some heritage connections there, I've been sort of dreading this moment since October 7th because of all the subsequent ways in which Iran's positioned itself vis-a-vis that conflict and the way with which, for Israeli governments, Iran is, in a sense, in their mind, the cause of it all, that if they would just do something about Iran.
That's not true, though, is it?
Well, what's not true is that, before the Ayatollahs, you might say it was Saddam Hussein. Before Saddam Hussein, it was Gamal Abdel Nasser. And from the Israeli perspective, there's always somebody who's the external reason why they can't ever think about a Palestinian state. But the difference is that, this is once again kind of the ironic part. Hamas, the resources it gets, funneled to it, had to have been done with the agreement of the Israeli government prior to October 7th. So you have once again this weird moment where resources, maybe from Iran, maybe from somewhere else, routed via Qatar to Hamas, and Hamas was also a reason for Israel, in its mind, to never, ever negotiate, right? Because the Palestinians weren't, quote unquote, not united.
Originally, though, it was Israel who created Hamas.
Israel is important as Hamas in Israeli strategic thinking was like a counterweight to the PLO. It was sort of right. It was the non-Fatah, and also it would allow Palestinians to be politically divided so that they could always say, well, there's no one we can talk to, blah blah blah, right? Yeah. So, but the point is, you move away from that kind of not finding to find any reason to not have a Palestinian state, right, to something that's different. I mean, October 7th does change a lot of things, right? And I sort of been wondering in my mind when exactly that moment was going to come, and then it came.
Yes.
I feel like that you really couldn't look at the confrontation with Hezbollah or anybody else, and some of the initial kind of trading of missiles. I remember was it April 24? They had the first exchange. And what was different about now from then is that those missile exchange between Israel and Iran back then, in my mind, looked very choreographed. That the Iranians were sort of saying, well, we're definitely going to do this, and we're definitely not going to do that. And the Israelis saying, well, we're definitely going to do this. And then so there was this kind of exchange of fire. True. But it didn't even in that moment strike me as necessarily going to translate into what we are, I think, a real risk now. And the real risk now is that there is this sort of misconception that you can bomb your way to the elimination of a nuclear weapons program.
It doesn't work.
That's sort of the assumption that you can that if you blow up Fordo, for example, if you blow up Natanz, for example, that's the end of the story from a nuclear issue. Or that if you were to remove X number of people from the Iranian government, that all of a sudden the government would go away and become a government that is just like, I don't know, something from pre-79. Both those things are very unrealistic strategically. Nuclear technology is not a new technology. I mean, there's a reason you have to have agreements for governments to give them up, because technically most governments could do it. If you think about countries that have peaceful nuclear programs, Japan, South Korea, they could wake up tomorrow and very quickly have a nuclear weapon because they have the technology for it. We don't worry about that because of our relationships with them, our understandings with them, our alliances with them. But with Iran, of course, it's a different story in American thinking and in Israeli thinking for certain. But it doesn't change the fact that whether your concern is primarily a nuclear weapons program or other regional actions, it's a political solution a diplomatic solution you have to be working for. A military solution is going to probably take you to the same place it took us with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with other things.
Yes.
The other thing
The
other risk that I think is being underplayed, excuse me, and it concerns me a lot. Israel is actively striking nuclear sites. Okay. And in those nuclear sites, there's nuclear material. And when you hit a nuclear site, there's the risk of dispersal of nuclear material. And Fordo is near Qom, which is a town of over 1 million. Natanz is near Esfahan. If you put up radioactive particles into the air, into the water, onto the ground, they don't just stay right near the plants, they'll drift to where population centers are. Similarly, Iran's not lobbing small rockets. They're lobbing big munitions at Israel. Israel's got its own nuclear reactors, its own facilities, its own undeclared weapons program. If a missile, intentionally or not, strikes one of those, a similar kind of problem could arise, not just for Netanyahu and other Israelis you might not like, but anybody living in that region. So
even beyond the borders of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, radioactivity doesn't care about that, just any more than COVID cared about that. Yeah. It's one of these things where I just wish the leaders involved would keep in mind that what they're risking is multi-generational harms to many populations.
Yeah.
Even once the war ends.
Why do you think they're so reckless? Because this is being reckless.
I've been stunned by the recklessness of a lot of different actors. I've been stunned by and Netanyahu government, I think, largely is driven by domestic politics. Let's look at it from the Iranian perspective, the Iranian government's perspective, not the Iranian population's perspective, which is a more complicated thing to talk about.
Yeah.
From the Iranian government's perspective, Israel and the United States are part of how they control their own domestic population. In other words, that's the external enemy. It's death to Israel, death to America, and that's the rationale for always being on a perpetual kind of revolutionary footing and always having a reason to suppress opposition. One of the challenges for anybody who wants to change Iran from within is that they're immediately associated with being an American spy or a Western such and such, and that it's about preserving the power of the regime. Similarly, jumping over to the Israeli side of the equation, Netanyahu is trying to outrun jail time. That involves staying in government with people who are the most extreme, more extreme than him, and he's pretty extreme on questions of, whether consider Palestinian state or equal rights for Arab citizens of Israel, however you want to construe those issues. Those folks are not going to play any of that. So the most extreme version of Israeli policy is also what's keeping Netanyahu out of legal jeopardy. And I think fundamentally, just like Khamenei wants to stay in his role, Netanyahu wants to stay in his role, and I think so much of what's been happening, so much of what is driving are those strangely domestic political reasons, without any concern for what it means for the populations they're supposed to be representing, and certainly without any concern for populations they've declared to be their enemies. I mean,
I remember listening to Wesley Clark talking about a memo. I'm sure you've heard of that, where they wanted to change regimes in 5 countries, and and change the Middle East, and that's Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Iran, and he was like, he just couldn't believe it. As you well know, Wesley Clark was the one of the big generals at the time. And if you go back to 88, actually, there was a plan to do exactly what's going on right now. The only missing link was before a week ago was Iran. Mm-hmm. They accomplished everything on that plan except two things, actually: driving the Palestinians out of the West Bank, and then changing the regime in Iran to make it easy for them to really do what they want to do. And it just seems like they're almost there, if they succeed in making changes in Iran.
There are some folks on the Israeli side of the camp who have this sort of, I think, expansive and exclusionary view of what Israel is supposed to be.
Yeah.
They see a bigger swath of land. They see a less Arabs in that land. They see both those things, and it's as unrealistic as any other maximalist kind of thinking. There's not really a zero-sum solution to this situation in all these countries. There only can be fundamentally lasting negotiated ones, and for those folks, if they can't get what they want in terms of the population changes they want, or the territorial expanse they want, they at least want to make the negotiated settlement impossible.
Exactly.
And I think that's also a lot of what has been driving a lot of Netanyahu's policies for years now. I mean, if you go back to Yigal Amir, there's always been a contingent in Israeli politics that would rather, resort to violence against their own leaders than even consider, that kind of thing. So, you have that problem. I worry that, on the Iranian side of the ledger, you also have, at this point, seasoned regional sort of military operators who are not ideologically convinced that it's a mistake to be, because Iran's also got this somewhat expansionist notion that it can have influence everywhere, and that comes from a fundamental insecurity about being invaded again. I mean, Iran's had a number of those, and so Iran's foreign policy, whether it be Pahlavi policy or your Islamic Republican policy, is that if you can't have a friendly country on your border, then you want to destabilize that country. That's and that is an aggressive stance, and most neighbors and other regional actors don't love it when Iranians interfere, right? And Iran's been very aggressive about that, and so Iran now finds itself with. I'm trying to think of. I don't know. Can you list an Iranian friend diplomatically right now? That's going to really actually help them. Maybe Russia, maybe not really.
Yeah.
And
that's really short-sighted. I think that they really never really made these alliances. I'll tell you what, Dr. Amin, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Please stay tuned.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Jumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Welcome back, and thank you for being with us. We're discussing the Israel-Iran war with Dr. Amin. We were talking before the break, we're talking about, I think it was short-sighted not to protect yourself regardless of philosophy, whatever is going on in the Middle East. I mean, two things I didn't see in Iran is I didn't see enough shelters, bomb shelters for the population. And I didn't see a lot of alliances with powerful countries to really fend off, situations like this. I wonder, what was the thinking there?
I think for a long while in Iran, you've had sort of two camps in the political elite. There's a political group that sort of saw that, okay, the revolution's over, we won, and it's time to find ways to work with other countries now.
Yeah.
And that means moderating certain asks. And you can see examples of this, for example, during the Khatami presidency from 97 to 2005, where basically his stance was, if the Palestinians make an agreement with Israel, well, what do we care? That's fine. We're done. Yeah. That would be the opposite of someone like an Ahmadinejad or maybe the supreme leader who would sort of be very uncompromising, go back to pre-48 or something else kind of thinking. So we've had another camp that says, no. The revolution's not over. It's always at risk. We can never trust that they're going to try and undermine us. And also, that same group tends to profit from an Iran that's economically closed off. If you control the black market, you don't mind that there has to be one.
Yeah.
And the Islamic Republic did inherit a very close sort of state corporate partnership from the Pahlavis. They've deepened that extends out to military arms. And so a bit like the example that we think of the People's Liberation Army in China, where there's a lot of enmeshment with the industries there, Iran's got a similar situation. So it's kind of almost like a protectionist attitude about economics, but also politics. And I think that's where the divide has been. The election in 2009, which turned out so disastrously in many ways for many Iranians, hinged on those questions. The people who were contending for that election were loyalist Islamic Republicans. They were not people who said, change the Islamic Republic. They just have a different sense of what that meant. And that was enough. You have the leadership in Iran is more uncompromising after 2009 than it was before, because a lot of the reformists, the ones who thought revolution's kind of over, we kind of won, let's have a more moderated stance with other people, those folks lost the argument. They're the ones under house arrest. They're the ones purged. And anything, of course, as it were, to the left of them is even more under siege. So you have even within the context of Iranian politics, a pretty ideologically committed outlook that is just not looking to play nicely with others all the time. And the challenge there is that, how do you work with that if you're trying to work with a group like that? That's one of the reasons the nuclear negotiations have been, the U.S. may have had, unreasonable demands here and there, but the Iranians also had demands that were born of a similar mentality. I mean, in Iranian politics, being for or against the JCPOA was as politically dangerous for you in that context as it was for, say, to be.
It took a long time for them to accept it as well.
Yeah, I mean, so you could be a politician in Iran who looks like you're playing too nice with the West, and that exposes you domestically to being. It's a bit like, if I could think about the example of in Palestinian politics, anyone who tries to work out a deal with Israel is accused of selling out the Palestinians. It's very hard. Yasser Arafat found that hard. I don't know that Abbas is even trying. But the point is, it's a very difficult stance to take. You think about Anwar Sadat. I mean, there's a lot of vulnerability you expose yourself to.
But Sadat's case was a little bit different. I mean, what Sadat did is, Sadat did not understand what Israel was trying to do. As you well know, Israel was trying to have peace only with Egypt, to remove Egypt out of the Arabic formula, because they understood is that if Egypt is out, Arabs will never ever be able to fight. And then, because the plan was from Israel's perspective is to take on every country individually, and it was a bit easier, and then also buy time to gobble more land, And this is why, as you well know, Carter and Begin at the time were in big conflict because President Carter, or the late President Carter, he wanted to solve the issue, and then Begin wanted only to talk about the peace between, Egypt and Israel.
I think to give Sadat some credit, I think he understood that from what the Israelis wanted, but what he wanted back was the Sinai. If you think about, for example, how 73 played out, I think the Syrians thought it was going to be, hey, we're all going to go together. And then Sadat said, well, I got what I wanted. I'm going to hold
Exactly. So this takes me to the second question. You have two different cultures there. You have the Persian culture and then the Arabic culture. And a lot of people don't understand this. They're two different cultures. And then, Iranians, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you know this better than I do, are more nationalist than Arabs are. Arabs are a lot more divided. They still rally around their government, don't they? Iranians?
Well, I would hesitate to say that they're in a sense they're that different. I think first of all, a couple things about Iran to recognize, and I think you would recognize this in sort of Arab majority countries as well. Iran's not sort of a homogeneous population. There is a barely Persian speaking majority or plurality, but there's other ethnic groups. There's Azeris, there's Kurds, there's even there's an Arab population in the southwest. There's Baluch, there's other groups. So nationalism in the Iranian case has also not always been an easy thing, not always been an easy sell to everybody. And if you think about one of the things that happened with the Women Life Freedom protests was those protesters were also talking about being more accommodating of the ethnic plurality of Iran, but a version of Iran that didn't require you to be the most Persian thing you could ever be. That it was okay to be Kurdish and Persian. It was okay to be an Azeri-speaking Persian. My family, for example, are Azeri Iranian. So, and so there are complications with notions of Iranian patriotism and Iranian nationalism, as there would be in Egypt, as there would be in Iraq, as there would be elsewhere, because a lot of these nation states, you can draw a circle around a bunch of people or on some land, but all kinds of people are going to be there. They don't necessarily see themselves in the same relationship with the government. And there's been two responses to this in the region. One is it's very, very suppressive and insist on no, this is how we're going to do it. This is what Egyptian means. This is what Syrian means, right? There's this is what Iraqi means. This is what Iranian means. Or at moments, there's an attempt to be a little more accommodating of the differences that exist, strike some sort of balance. You think of Lebanon as a difficult example, but an attempt at that. And I think not that Lebanon necessarily presents always the best model for everybody to think about, but the mere thought that there's a lot of different people here. We all want to live here. We all want to have a government that works for us. Maybe you need to have something a little more democratic, a little more rule of law, a little more respectful of civil rights, where the stakes of politics aren't so high. The stakes in Iran, politically, domestically, are very high. You lose an election, you might be in jail, right? In a sense, that's what's happened to Netanyahu. If he loses the elections, he might be in jail. I think.
Well, there's a little bit of a difference there, don't you think? I mean, Netanyahu is a criminal in the eyes of the courts. But people lose election in Iran. They may not be criminal. They can still go to jail.
Oh, well, one of the things that's sort of come out in the coverage that's coming, publicly announced coverage, if you look at a source like Iran Wire and some of the other places that are following it, one of the first things that the Iranian government realized in the wake of the initial attacks this past week was, how did they kill all our people so easily? And the answer is that can't happen unless there's somebody helping. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Israeli commandos aren't ghosts. They have to work with people. So, and then even the assassination I took notice with the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. I'm like, okay, how does that happen unless somebody in Iran's helping?
Yes.
Right? And who it is and why it is, I don't know. But the point is, that is exactly what the Iranian government, the Islamic Republican government, is worried about. There have been some 24 people announced arrested today. I think there's been 3 executions. There's like a purge going on. So for Iranians inside, their government is actually less trustful of them today than it was a week ago. And frankly, it wasn't that trustful of its people a week ago. I should say also that the Islamic Republic has, since the revolution, been preparing for 2 things, trying to defend itself against 2 things. One, a revolution happening to it like was able to carry out. So they have there's an elaborate patronage network. One thinks of, the Islamic Republican Guard, but also the Basij units and the various ways in which there's a constituency that depends economically on the Islamic Republic. That's a way of having your roots go into society, not just be the people at the top, although it's still concentrated there. And they've also been trying to protect themselves against another invasion like happened with Iraq. And those are puts them in a kind of a perpetual defensive crouch, potentially more authoritarian at home, more aggressive in terms of foreign policy. And I don't know what breaks that cycle, but I'm pretty sure another war isn't a thing that breaks that cycle.
Sure. So what's going to happen?
Well,
if we can tell.
I'm a recovering historian, so I don't even want to say that that I'm an expert in the past to the extent that it would. But truthfully, it's really has struck me as how there are certain things that seem to me more likely. I'll put it this way. What seems probable to me? What seems probable to me is that the fighting goes on for weeks more in some form. What seems probable to me that if the U.S. does engage, it disengages, and that basically you will have some version of an Iranian government still there, some vestiges of its nuclear program still there, and still the problem that, it's going to be a lot of war to get kind of where we are now. It's a bit like what the Iran-Iraq war was. Yeah, that was finally settled. The borders had changed not a bit. It's
really unfortunate, and no matter how you look at it, I don't think Israel is going to accomplish any of its goals.
No, I don't think, mainly because its goals are fundamentally flawed in that it feels that for some there's this sort of, there's no way they're willing to imagine a post-occupation Israel and a post-occupation Palestine together. When I say together, I don't mean like great friendly neighbors. I just mean countries that exist, people that have rights within them, and that are not in active conflict, war, and that maybe there's some multi-generational efforts to, we'll call them reparations. That's ultimately where Israel Palestine has to go. If that were to ever happen, I actually think one of the biggest drivers of political strife in the region would actually be gone. It's not the only driver. There's other things people can be fighting about: water, oil, all that kind of stuff. Other national conflicts you think about, for example, what Kurds want from Turkey, what Kurds want from Iraq, what Kurds want from Iran. Those aren't easy issues either. But I can only hope that at some point the notion that you can force these things into submission militarily, repressively, however you want to describe that notion just becomes clearer and clearer to be not just amoral or immoral, but also ineffective. You won't really get there. And I don't know how long it'll take for that lesson to sink in for the people who are in positions of authority, or how long it'll be the case for people in the region to be able to have the kind of influence with their government that they should have, which is that, votes should matter.
Exactly.
Representation in government should matter. Rule of law should matter. I should to circle back to one thing. Why fundamentally were there so many people willing to cooperate with? Why was Israel able to penetrate the Iranian government? It's pretty clear that one thing that goes along with the authoritarian kind of government that Iran has is corruption. When you said if somebody loses an election in Iran, they might not necessarily go to jail unless they violated the law, it is more than likely that most of the people in the Iranian elite have violated the law. It's just a matter they haven't been caught for it yet or called out on it.
Yeah.
Nearly every politician in Iran who's risen to prominence, who's fallen out of disfavor, has had a corruption charge waiting for them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a manufactured one.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm sure that right now these things are kind of, put on hold since they're facing, a much bigger enemy, which is the Israeli bombardment. And, what I don't understand is that why would the Iranian government accept the 60-day deadline, knowing that last time when they negotiated, it took months? The 60-day deadline was like a setup to me. I don't buy the fact that America is not helping Israel in the war. I mean, they're helping them with intelligence. They're using American lines through Iraq to get to Iran, providing all kind of weapons they need. Yeah, they're not fighting directly, and also shooting at the missiles going toward Israel. So there is assistance there. But, for the Iranian government to accept 60-day deadline to reach an agreement, like you're not buying watermelon here. You're talking about something huge here. So,
I think one of the things that's unfortunate about the nuclear program issue is that in Iran, it's become this issue that there are environmental reasons to not want even a civilian nuclear program in Iran. Yeah. And environmentalists get repressed in Iran when they point out, there's a lot of water that's involved in operating those plants. Do we have a lot of that? We don't. And when you pointed out the lack of shelters and the lack of defenses, believe me, the Iranian population is recognizing that they are not well protected by a government that it claims it's doing all the terrible things it does to protect them, right? And I think one of the things that's also going to be true, because it was true of not so much Mohammad Reza Shah, but his father Reza Shah, that the military that in Iran is partly about protecting ultimately the regime, not the country. And at a certain point, it needs to do both for the people to support it long term. And in 1941, Reza Shah's military could not
need to evolve as well. You need to evolve. You can't be constant.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know where that's going to go. I think there's an appetite in Iran for a lot of change, but I don't think there's an appetite in Iran for any kind of war. I think most Iranians are not yet old enough. They remember, even the ones who don't remember the Iraq War, the revolution, they remember 2009. They're going to remember how terrible the repression was after the Mahsa Amini murder. So there's not, I don't think, a huge appetite in Iran for, as it were, civil war. But what changes that is desperation, and what produces that is scarcity. And I think that's one of the things that war does. Right now, people who want to know how their relatives are in Iran, their friends are in Iran, haven't been able to get news since Sunday of any kind.
Yeah. I really thought Iran would do what China did, which was very smart at, undoing communism very slowly, not like Russia where they dropped the ball. I really thought that Iran would, the revolution is over, the war with Iraq is over, you have established yourself in the area, and now we start peeling little by little to institute, more and more, measures in which economic measures at this, at the same time, I got to give a credit to the government, to the Iranians for really surviving horrible time. I mean, sanctions are very, very horrible there. And they could, they still, managed to, put satellites in space and do a lot of good stuff, I'm sure that a lot of improvement can be done on the ground. But,
It is striking that for all the challenges Iran had, whether you consider that just the revolution itself and the setbacks and the length of the war with Iraq and other things, when I visited in 2005, it had been since 1979. I had
totally different.
There were some things, but I mean, metro systems, every Iranian I met complained about how the government wasn't doing anything right. But I did say, but you guys have a metro now. You didn't have one when I was a kid.
Exactly.
They're like, but those plans were in place by the Shah's time. And of course, they're not wrong. There were plans in place. But the government, in a sense, has delivered. But one thing that the Iranian government has not been able to, Iran's population is so much larger than it was when I was a kid. I mean, when I left Iran, it was 36 million. It's now topping 90, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't include, it's much more urbanized. It's much more educated. There's a lot of things that people have. And so, in fact, I know that Iranians in the 90s, the Iranian government officials did talk about the China model. They talk about it. But the political contestation of the elite over those presidential elections really is, you have, unfortunately, an elite in Iran that is much more groupthink, much more hardline than it was 15 years ago. And you have a population that might be equally divided. I don't know what the mix of diehard, ride or die pro-regime people are, but they're there. And I don't know what the mix of people who want, say a secular democratic government or a very, very reformed Islamic republic, I don't know what that percentage is, but you have large groups of both, And I think and so that's why the issue of regime change is one of those weird questions. To what?
Exactly. And this is not something decided by outsiders anyway.
Exactly. Whatever you might want to try and do, there's going to be contestation over that. And really, I think the best thing the Iranians can hope for is that whatever happens, it doesn't happen with violence, and that it happens in some sort of gradual process that everyone can kind of.
Driven by the inside, driven by the Iranians themselves.
I honestly thought if for example, Iran just declared a moratorium on the death penalty.
Yeah.
If it agreed that there'd be no such thing as a political crime, if it stopped trying to enforce any kind of particular version of morality the way it does now, it would make and just let people kind of. It sounds very utopian and very kumbaya and pie in the sky. I know, but I know that, but I can want that for people, right?
Sure.
I do think that besides being kind of like sounding nice, I actually think it's the most efficient, most practical way for them to change.
Absolutely.
Because
we hope things will. First thing, we hope the war stops.
Yes.
Second, we hope that they find a way in which they reconcile inside the country, and then they make really changes. Dr. Amin, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. This has really been a great discussion. What we're going to do is we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Please stay tuned.
Ziad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziad.com. That's www.ziad.com. Ziad, quality products from our family to yours.
A car accident can change your life in an instant. As a result of a car accident, you may become unemployed. As a result of a car accident, you may need a lot of medical treatment. People think that insurance companies are on their side. Why? Because they're giving them one or two benefits. Are they giving them all the benefits they deserve? How would one know unless you consult with an attorney? Call the law offices of Jumana Kiruz at 248-557-3645. 248-557-3645.
Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493.
Welcome back, and thank you for being with us. This is Khalil Hachem. I just want to thank Dr. Amin for being on the show, and thanks to Mike for great production, and thanks to Laila, the founder in person for this radio show. Finally, just one final note that I would like to leave you with, which is you can always make a difference. Write your congressman, write your senator, write the White House, let them know not to get involved in this war, find a diplomatic solution so no more people, will die of this, and then we don't have to worry about, the whole area becoming immersed into wars. I want to wish you a wonderful weekend and happy weekend and peaceful weekend. Enjoy the weekend. Bye now.